next panel. This is the Milestones to Success, and I want to invite our speakers from this morning to come down. Doug's back in the back talking. He should be saying it anytime soon. Nicolette, you can come back down. Nicolette and Gabriela, please. So the purpose of this panel is going to be twofold. Doug will not be starting first since he just left the room. So what we're going to do with this panel, some people have suggested, okay, what's next? We're not really ready for like what's next, what can we do? We're still letting this sink in, we're still learning. But one of the ways that we're going to learn is by hearing the experience of these people who have been working in these areas, specifically where did your motivation come from? How did you carry that forward in what is a long process? And what kind of things would we look for to learn from your strategies? So I think that's a three-part question. So if you want to rest and let Gabriela go forward. Okay.
Okay. So where did motivation come from? I'm not sure if when Chuck introduced me, he said I was part of a litigation team. So I worked at a think tank, and basically we were working all week thinking new cases to our courts to enhance the situation of human rights in our country. So that was my work, to think about these issues. Before being part of that litigation team, I worked for the Colombian Congress for 3 years or so. And although it was a great experience to see how politics work in my country, I got frustrated. My work there as part of the Green Party was to design the actual projects of law that the party was going to present to the Congress. So I had the chance to write about payment for environmental services, to write about mechanisms of participation for communities, and seeing that those laws were not approved and what the arguments from the counterparts were, made me think that maybe getting involved with community work was going to be more useful at the end to make some changes. So as part of this litigation team, I did my research on climate change, but basically motivation comes from realizing that changes were not happening in Congress.
So my story is a little bit similar. You know, as has been mentioned, I've been working for Honor the Earth the last 5 years, mostly engaged in trying to oppose an oil pipeline. And it's very clear from the regulatory process that, you know, not only is that process designed to permit projects, there's not really any room in that process for, you know, indigenous thought or looking at things from a whole systems perspective. In the case of oil pipelines, it's so fragmented. In the United States, it's a state-by-state permit process. Gas pipelines in the United States is a federal process, so some people think that it's better, but we're still getting those approved all over the place. So is it any better? With the Anishinaabe in Minnesota, not their creation story, but their migration story talks about them being told to move to a place where food grows on the water. And that turns out to be wild rice or monoman. And so it's a not only sacred plant to the Anishinaabe people, but it's a cultural keystone species that without the Anishinaabe will cease to exist. You know, not necessarily because they'll die out because they don't have food to eat, but because their culture is so intimately connected to this plant that if that plant no longer exists, the Anishinaabe no longer exists. And this plant is been threatened by both historical losses due to changes in land use patterns, but contemporary threats, including sulfate standards, which comes from the mining industry in Minnesota, increasing wetlands destruction, climate change, the pipeline I spoke about, and we had Thomas come and do a workshop a few years back for some tribal leaders about this rights of nature approach and what it could potentially do. And so from there, it was decided to look at this rights of Monoman, and it's, from that point on, and I really didn't have too much to do with it. I just helped kind of keep paperwork moving in the right places. And that ended up passing at the White Earth Nation in Minnesota. They passed the Rights of Monoman law, which was the first rights of nature law that acknowledged specific plant species. But hoping to build off of that success, I started working in Duluth, Minnesota, to look at the rights of an estuary in the community.
Thank you. All right, I just want to make sure you had the question.
Yeah, what is it? I
So
saw
the-
it.
We're not
Thank
here. So the question was, where did your motivation come from for this work? How did you keep motivated through the length of the process? And what lessons can we in Florida take from what you learned? And then you all can circle back to that if you want to continue.
I never really, in my political life, I've never really saw myself as an environmentalist. Certainly, I care about things like that. I saw myself as a government person. I saw someone that took an oath of office to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the community. And this wasn't the only thing I ever was involved in. There was a ton of things in the record over 20 years in government that required our attention. And so I was already kind of screwed to that purpose. So when this comes along, they're going to frack in the city of Pittsburgh, all around. And if you could put that map up, it'll be worth more money. The first map I gave you, the frack tracker map of Pennsylvania. We got it? Okay, it's warming up. Anyway, what it is that why do I do that? Well, it's something I do. It kind of runs in my family. We're an Irish-centric family. My great-grandfather killed Lord Leitrim in an assassination in 1878 and celebrated. I got stuck. I was marked. I don't know. You grow up in a family where you're taught not to take crap from anybody. I think that has a lot to do with it. It really does, about where we come from. What's our level of what's our obedience level? How easily led are we, or do we lead? And so. There's five kids in my family, and we all grew up to do different things, and none of us, we were all given the confidence by a milkman and a housewife to go out and be bold, to stand up for what's right, live your faith. They were both devout Catholics, I'm a recovering Catholic. It's all those things. There's no magic button to this. And we all find our journey and our path and how we serve. So now you got somebody that doesn't really care what people think, and we have the confidence to go out and say what we think, and to sell it and persuade and convince. The other thing is I don't like to lose. So when I get into a fight, I'd better damn well win. And I'm in it up to my neck. And you make that, it's about commitment. It's about understanding what your role is. You are not a spectator in this game, that you are a player. So that's what kept me on course here. That's what keeps me on track. And also the rigor of having a knowledge-based offering. You don't do this on a feeling, and you don't do this on a belief. And I'll end with this. One of my favorite things to do by opposition in any kind of debate is how many times you hear on TV, well, I believe this, and I believe that. And I always come back at people like this. I said, belief is great for church. In fact, it's required. You can't join a church unless you believe. I said, where I work, you better know. I want to know what you know. I don't care what you believe. And that's what you really got to go at it. And guess what? Science is on my side. Science is on your side. The facts are on our side. We know if you spill a 55-gallon drum of diesel fuel into a 50 million gallon lake, you just killed the lake. We know that. There's no dispute here. We know that if you're putting BETX up in the air, that you're going to get increased cancer rates. We know that in Allegheny County, where I live, we have 2 times the national childhood asthma rates as a direct result of the air quality that we have, which sucks because we're on the list every year as one of the worst of 3 places in the country with bad air. Even though all the industry's gone, we still have bad air, real bad. And we're going to get worse air with a cracker plant and the ongoing spread of oil and gas. And can you go to the other? That's for you planner folks. That's a place without zoning. That's Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh. This is right outside the city in a place called Versailles. We call it Versailles. Pittsburgh, 1920. And as you can see, this is what corporatocracy looks like. This is how you would live without zoning laws, without environmental laws that are getting rolled back by Donald Trump, without all that stuff. That's what your world looks like. This is what the 7th generation thought about in 1890. This was their world. This is what they saw as progress. This is what Carnegie, Frick, Mellon, all these folks saw is what the world should look like because they get the buck. Rockefeller. We don't want that, and we changed that, and we don't put up with that. And yet we have a retrenchment now of this kind of thinking to come back and say it's okay to get rid of all this stuff and open up our land, my land, your land, this land, for the exclusive use of oil and gas or extracted industries, coal, whatever. Could you get the other map up on the other tab? No, the other one. That's this one. This is Pennsylvania, and all those little yellow dots are wells. If you could click on that map. And a reporter from Politico, you asked me that question back there about, how does it stop things?
Well,
This is where I live. Right in the middle where the B is.
Oh, B.
Wow.
wow.
You don't think that oil and gas
Yeah.
plant didn't have
Yeah.
I'm surrounded in a sea of gas wells. I'm an island. And that public policy that we did in Pittsburgh, the county is not the city. We're at only 55 square miles of that. But it acts as a buttress today against what happened all around us in Washington County, where farmers didn't have any money, and they're getting 5,000 an acres and getting 80,000 a month on royalties. I'd take that deal.
Yeah.
But as you can see that, I think the purple ones are, well, those are the wells, and the yellow's violations.
Okay.
Wow.
There's a little example earlier about, blowing junk in your cup of water and all that stuff. That's what's going on here.
Yeah.
So when you say, why am I committed to this? This is where I live, guys. I'm going to turn my town into Versailles. Or Versailles, if you're from France. There you go.
Thank you. So, Gabriela, would you like to talk about lessons that Florida can take?
Well, if you put me a question like that, I can share the lessons I learned from my case. I mean, I'm here in a room full of people with much more experience than the one I have. So, in this case, I want to repeat your words because feeling and believing is important, but you need to provide evidence. And many times when we are working with communities, the government or the private sector or people in general don't trust our arguments because they think we are based on feelings. And although that is important and that's what keeps us moving, we need to use science. And that was key in our case. The judges didn't dismiss the case because they knew it was based on information produced by our own government. So presenting that evidence and talking with interdisciplinary groups, involving scientists, involving people who work in geography, in biology, and asking them to translate those documents they work on simple words. That was key in our case. It was also key to have an interdisciplinary group that also involved people who work in communications. So sharing this story with journalists who were able to translate to this case in simple words to everyday people, it was important. We also looked for allies that were not in our same group. So we look for other universities, we look for people here in the States, people around the world who were willing to help us, providing new arguments to the court. If I could go back in time, maybe I would have spent more time working on a plan. We really didn't think that we were going to win. So when the decision came out, it was like, yeah, okay, so now we have a big responsibility.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with this? So maybe planning from the beginning, thinking that winning is a possibility, and that we have to work after that, I would have done that different. We are still working on a plan to implement the decision, but having a plan from the beginning would have been a great idea. And yes, maybe interdisciplinarity and education. We need to start talking with people who are not like us, and to get others involved. That's my biggest lesson.
Okay, so our lessons that you can learn. You know, I haven't been at this rights of nature stuff for too long, and it hasn't been too terrible of an uphill battle. But I think that you know, there are a few lessons that we can all kind of think about. And there's one that's, you know, a lot of us in this room may have already spent a lot of time in the regulatory process trying to oppose projects that we know are going to be bad for our communities. And that process can be pretty soul draining and frustrating and disillusioning. And so, you know, considering all of the time and energy and heartbreak and frustration you may have put into that process, you know, shifting your attention away from that process that we know is rigged into creating a new process that's going to bring about real change is, you know, one thing to kind of think about, not only for yourself, but other people that you're trying to bring into your fold. You know, I know in Minnesota there's been a lot of faith in the system, that the system's gonna work. Well, guess what? The system does work, but it works for corporations, not for people.
Well, they invented their system.
Yeah, it's their system. So, you know, do you want to spend time playing in a system that's rigged against you, or do you want to spend time developing a system that's rigged for you? The other thing that I think is important for all of us to remember when we're acting as an activist is that, especially if you're working as an environmental activist, that you actually have to get out and spend time in nature and try to enjoy this thing that you're trying to protect, because without that that time to relax and reflect and restore yourself, you're not going to be able to have the energy to keep up the fight that you're going to need to keep up. Let me see, I think I have one other thing, my phone keeps shutting off. No, I guess that was a big thing, that, you know, it's kind of, you know, if you don't necessarily have this deep commitment and connection to protecting the planet, you know, if you have a deep connection and commitment to protecting your children or their children, you know, that can also be another source of inspiration to keep pushing and keep trying to change things.
Thank you.